Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mark Tomson, and I'm joining you today from the other side of the world, here in Brisbane, Australia. And I'm delighted to be here to share with you experience in eco-efficient buildings and the importance of sustainable forestry. So, moving right into my presentation. Many of you would be aware of what's happening around the world at the moment. Within California, there are some horrible fires happening right now. And one of the consequences of those horrible fires is air pollution. And it might sound strange to you that I'm talking about sustainable forests, but there's even a greater need in this day and age to ensure that our forests are sustainable. The world is currently experiencing these huge disasters, and it's important to understand that the fires in Australia, which have affected a large part of Australia, are huge in contrast to the areas in Europe. The good news is, however, that many of the forests in Europe are sustainable, and so we do have a good supply of timber as time goes on. What we're finding at the moment is that our forests are under threat, and you realise that that's not such a problem if they're well managed. Fortunately, there are two certification systems that are looking after our forests around the world, and albeit, unfortunately, they have no chance of sustaining the sorts of pressures that they are under at the moment. Here in Australia, earlier on this year, we faced the most catastrophic fires that we've ever seen. And the real consequence of this has not just been in affecting communities and wildlife, but it has had a massive effect on our economy, and it's also had a huge impact on our lifestyle. Now, interestingly, it's not all bad news, because many of the forests here in Australia have been managed sustainably. And as a result of that, we're fortunate that we are able to sustain and save many of the timbers that have been burnt in these catastrophic fires. Fortunately, in managed forests, or what we call sustainable forests, there is the opportunity within 12 months to mill the timber and to be able to use it satisfactorily within our built environments. So the good news, notwithstanding catastrophic events around the world, is that because we have been working with sustainably managed forests, there is the opportunity to capture these materials and to work with them and to direct them to our built environment and our built infrastructure. The great news about this is that this only comes about from a well-managed system. What we found is that the opportunities that we now have is to grab that fire-affected trees and forests, and fortunately, if we grab them within 12 months, we're able to ensure that we can harvest that timber and harvest it in a way that hasn't been adversely affected. We have at least 12 months to capture this, and currently here in Australia we have a recovery thing to capture all of the timber that has been burnt. And this is an important part of not only recouping our, our societies from these tragedies, but to also ensure that we have supplies for our future. So the sustainable forestry story becomes really important for people like myself who are architects and people working in the building industry to ensure that we have a sustainable future. So the importance of having sustainable timber for our buildings becomes critical, and it's the forestry industry that has been built over many years that provides that strong foundation for us to ensure that we have a renewable material. One of the side effects of using sustainable timber from forests is that we're also able to protect biodiversity, that is the animals and the various other creatures that inhabit our forests. And so in managed forests, we're able to have programs to ensure such disasters can be managed, whereas in a lot of natural forests and forests that aren't managed sustainably, there can be catastrophic loss. So the importance of sustainable forests means that we can actually build our buildings sustainably. What I mean by sustainably is an eco-efficient building. An eco-efficient building is one of more value with less environmental impact. It's important that all architects are now working to achieve eco-efficient buildings. And as a result of this, we have a much better chance of withstanding the common challenges we have right around the world at the moment. So eco-efficiency is quite different to standard building because it has a focus on reducing the amount of materials that go into a building. Naturally, it also will go some way to reducing the amount of energy that a building consumes. It's also necessary to be aware of the toxic materials or any toxic materials that may be used in the building. Another principle behind eco-efficient buildings is to ensure that they have recyclability and that they use recycled materials where possible. The benefit of sustainable forests is that these are renewable materials or renewable resources. So we have access to them now, and if managed correctly, our future generations will have access to these materials. And interestingly, we're finding more and more that timber is really a durable product that, when managed and detailed correctly, goes a great way to ensuring that we have practical, fit-for-purpose materials for our modern buildings. Now, one of the big issues at the moment is to ensure that we're reducing our carbon impact. And this is a common problem around the world. And what we've found with engineered timber and engineered wood in particular is that it has considerably lower carbon dioxide outputs than other materials. And so timber is actually responsible for taking carbon dioxide out of the air, and it is an amazing material to actually work with nature to sustain our planet and our survival on this planet. I guess the challenge for us as architects in the future is to make sure that not only are we using sustainable timber, but we're also ensuring that we're building sustainable environments and environments that are suitable for ourselves and our other creatures. And eco-effective and eco-efficient buildings in the future are going to capture a completely different atmosphere to perhaps what we have in the past. Now, interestingly, timber is a recognised timber, a recognised material, I should say. And we have been using timber sustainably for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And certainly there are examples in Europe and also in Japan where timber has been used in a way that it has been sustainable for years and years before us. So our challenge moving forward is to make sure that we detail our buildings to ensure that they will last in the same way that some of these magnificent structures have lasted in the past. In my own practice here in Australia, I found one of my very first buildings 20 years ago was sensibly a timber building. It's a building that I built for my family here in one of the suburbs of Brisbane. And as a result of that, I've really come to understand and benefit from the use of sustainable timber. It's the character of timber that really is the thing that captures most people's attention, and the ability to feel like you're living with nature. And that was certainly one of the successful points about the home that I built. One of the interesting things about this home is that it used engineered timber, or in this instance plywood, pretty well for the walls, the floors, the ceilings, and the joinery components. So we found by using one material really efficiently, we were able to capture the benefits and value from working with a sustainable material for an efficient purpose. The unique thing about the way this building went together was it was laid out in at the Construction Training Centre, which is one of the training centres for trades here in Brisbane. And it was largely assembled in parts off-site, brought to site and then assembled on site. Now, this is very unusual for buildings here in Australia. And it was a great way to learn the benefits that prefabrication can provide. The end result for me was much better than I expected in that I was able to use it for my professional life. It gained 3 architectural awards for my practice. And it became a really great springboard for future work as a result of the efficient use of timber and the use of materials that worked towards a generally sustainable or holistic eco-efficient solution. This led to other commissions and to a larger scale of housing, in particular this particular project, which was Brisbane's first sustainable apartment project, which features timber externally and internally. And then, as this happens, the scale increases and we're involved in much larger work. So the involvement in smaller timber projects has actually led me into a vast range of really interesting projects. One of the projects I'm working on at the moment is outside Australia, and it involves using plywood in a modular fashion to achieve basically buildings that will be used for mining accommodation. And these are very simple but very effective and efficient buildings using solar panels as the roofing skin and plywood and engineered material that basically makes up the rest. So these are very efficient buildings from a cost point of view, very effective from a low carbon point of view, and are able to be made and manufactured locally in Papua New Guinea. So it avoids a whole lot of issues in terms of transporting materials to other parts of the world. Doesn't look particularly beautiful at the moment, but as time goes on, these buildings will take a new lease of life and eventually get used by locals after the mining use has been completed. But the material that many of you are aware of, which here in Australia we are using more and more, is cross-laminated timber. And interestingly, it's important to understand that cross-laminated timber is actually one of the future materials that go a long way to saving the world and reducing the carbon footprint of buildings. It's important to understand that not only is it just a material feature, but the use of timber from sustainable forests goes a long way to meeting our world needs in terms of addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, which the United Nations adopt and are being used by corporations and entities right around the world. Quite important for architects to have some understanding of how their work locally can actually fit into a broader and global context. And the understanding and use of these Sustainable Development Goals has been great in terms of giving oneself a local and global perspective. So there are two major timber certification systems in the world. They are PEFC and FFC. And by using either one of these, you will be certain that you are contributing to a sustainable future. It's important to understand that PEFC is the internationally recognised sustainable certification scheme, and it has application pretty well right around the world. The amazing thing about using these standards is that there's an enormous amount of support and record that ensures you as an architect have confidence in knowing where your materials have come from, and using chain of custody certification, you can ensure that you know the background to the materials that you've used. It's important to understand that there are numerous benefits of certified timber for architects. It's not just a beautiful material to work with, but it's a great material that is also considered to be a healthy material. One of the key factors that it's important to use materials like timber is that it's renewable, it's durable, it's able to be recycled, it reduces CO2, it retains heat and uses less energy, as well as being 100% biodegradable, and it has a positive effect on the mental and physical health of your inhabitants and people using your buildings. So biophilic design has become an important part of our work here in Australia, and architects now are understanding that wood can have remarkably positive effects. We now have lots of material around that gives us good information that explains how sustainable timber improves productivity in our workplaces, and it goes a long way to helping the mindset of people working around it. Here in Brisbane, in the last few years, we've built one of the world's tallest CLT buildings. That's been overshadowed since, but CLT is becoming a material that we're seeing more and more here in the southern hemisphere. It's important that we see and we understand as architects the multiple benefits that timber provides, and it doesn't necessarily provide one type of architecture. It provides the opportunity to really explore lots of different ways of achieving whatever you desire. And the efficiency of construction and prefabrication is proven to be one of the other things that is a great benefit. One of the key things I'm keen to talk to you about is design for deconstruction, because this is another part of eco-efficient buildings. It's important that we should not only be designing buildings to last for as long as possible, but we should understand that they will need to be deconstructed. And here in Australia, we have some excellent buildings that have been built using these principles, whereby all the building parts are designed so that they can be disassembled at some stage in the future, therefore maximising the material. So one of my key points is that PEFC is the sustainable certification process that you can use for eco-efficient buildings. And I hope you'll come across this book called Tomorrow's Timber, which is important, has just been released. I know there's a session about this book on. And hopefully you can look out for the timber talks that PEFC can actually organise for your office as well. So I hope what I've been able to do in this session is to give you some insights as to why I have become passionate about using timber. I understand how important it is to use certified timber, because that's the only way I can hand on heart say that I'm actually looking at sustainable architecture for now and for the generations to come. I hope with EFC certification, you too might be able to gain the benefits of a sustainable future. Thank you very much.